I'm kind of making an application video. Something I don't know if anyone's ever tried before, but it's kind of like putting out my resume, but on YouTube. So, what I'm going to do here is kind of describe my previous lathe experience and some of the flaws that I witnessed in certain shops compared to others and stuff like that. And just to kind of express my ideas during operation that benefited me the most from one job to another. So, but in the end, it's describing how I operate a lathe and past lathe experience. So, I can tell you right now that I don't know the specifics of some of the lathes I ran. I know what a summit lathe is and turn master and what was the other one? There was a turn master. I can't recall the other one. There's quite a few different types of lathes out there. Uh, when I worked at EMJ, I operated a very interesting lathe. As you can see, I'll probably end up posting a picture at this point, kind of showing off these lathes. But these lathes supposedly were refurbished. They had been sitting, rusting away for a long time, and they were owned, I believe it was National Oil Well. I believe it was National Oil Well. Or, yeah, or drill, I can't remember. Ocean Drilling or something like that. So anyways, EMJ got a hold of these lathes, and we'd blind hole drill through them. And that was actually an incredible experience because we, at that moment, were utilizing older technology, but a newer type of cutting head. So it was kind of like a merge of the old and the new. And somehow I always seemed to be really successful at pulling it off because I come to the determination that the actual Unidex heads that we cut with were they're designed basically to use the caliber, and you calibrate it and you make sure that both of the guy pads comparable to the actual outer tooth is supposed to be basically spot on. And one way you would do that is to intentionally wear out the guy pads on the Unidex heads. And it was very similar to that with the tree pan, but the problem with the tree pan is that usually the actual seat was built into the head itself. It wasn't on a pivoting platform of any type. So, you had to grind the tool as well, and it was more acceptable, or more, it was more of a risk of it squaring the part out. Tree panning would create a core in the middle of the actual the finished product. But what was real interesting is that if you actually blind drill through a large part with a Unidex head, you won't have that core, but you get like a superb quality piece, and then you just basically recycle or resell the shavings. But there was times where we actually were cutting a really large part, and the customer wanted the core back so they can make something else out of it. So tree panning on the larger hand meant a lot more babysitting, a lot more observation of the actual drill part of the machine. The tree pans, when they were connected to the head, they went behind the barrel and the two pressure plates. If you're tree panning, they'll bounce and walk around, right? They'll loosen up the steady rest. So, and the thing is about the steady rest too is they had to be spot accurate too, and that was one of the things that made it real difficult. Is that you made your determination of how straight it is by the front steady rest and the tailstock. The middle one, it really became the longer apart, how far forward or back do you needed it? Because you put it in the middle, you get two wobbles, you get an oscillation. And that job had almost a just really great problem solving vibe about it, comparable to some of the other shops that I worked at. But unfortunately, when I worked there, foreigners, especially because of one individual alone, and I don't know why he didn't like me. So his name was Paz, but he told me a story about King Ranch and all that stuff, and he was El Salvadorian. So what I ended up getting ousted during a point in the company where there was apparently a union up north that was protesting, pay increase, and in order to salvage or to satisfy those shops, they had to apparently do mass layoffs throughout the United States. Real goofy, weird shit. But when I came back, so they said they would hire me, don't look for a job. I came back there, and there was nothing. The shop was filled with El Salvadorians. So yeah, it was my first, I guess, scene of racism from the other perspective. So I was sacrificial, but the other guy, he got his way. And there were not. The shop was closed months later. And I feel bad about it to a certain extent because those guys lost their jobs, but just sacrificing one so you can have many was the first. That was the first time that happened to me. So, and then I went on and worked at TAM. TAM was badass. I out of the majority of all the jobs, TAM had moments in time where I was just enjoying the hell out of myself. We were knocking out parts and doing a good job at their older location, where it felt like nothing could go wrong. There'd be no downsizing or downturns, and everyone's jobs were secure, and we all were just bullshitting, and it was basically a shop full of friends and buddies and all that stuff, until we started moving to a new facility, and there was a downtake in the fracking industry, and people started to show more racism. And first was my buddy. He had a 9 Inch Nails tattoo on his arm, and the blacks at the shop were basically calling him out, saying he was a Nazi. And me and him never witnessed that before. Just really surprising. And I kept on working my ass off. People were telling me to slow down. Slow down. Slow down. Don't keep going. Let them figure things out and get it going again. Let's slow down. It's like, I don't know what you are talking about. I had a quota, and I wanted to meet it. So even bad parts I was repairing. I was getting shit past the door, and it created I have to get rid of this guy kind of vibe in the shop. And out of nowhere, I come to work, and I'm escorted to the door and told to wait. And I was like, what happened? What's going on? You got a meeting with the vice president or so on and so forth here at TAM. And I went there, and he didn't even want to hear my side of the story. He says I was racist, and then they showed a glimpse real quick of they said I was yelling out the N-word, slur N-words to them, and it was completely untrue. It was the most crazy, fundamentally strange thing that had ever happened to me. I felt double-crossed. Like, all these guys were cool, and they started becoming uncool. They couldn't get their act together, and the parts were coming out bad, and I was the end of that finish line before I got the inspection, and they all got together and wrote a little letter out and said that I was saying it, and I was gone with no no unemployment or nothing. But I cashed in my 401k, and that 401k was my unemployment for a couple of months. Those were the best work times of my life. Now I'm reaching this weird time where, after that company was Weatherford. Weatherford, I was the only white guy really there. I mean, there were some people in the office, but, and I already was on an island, but those guys, I always try to friends, like, I'm not against y'all or anything like that, and during the Trump's election, during the campaign, I was trying to explain to them, it's like I couldn't vote because I didn't like either one candidate. I was too, I guess, shocked. Just the campaign was so dirty, and and I didn't. But for some reason, during Trump's election, I was cornered several times by many of the staff trying to wonder or dig into my political opinions. It's like, do you like this, that? It's like, no, my problem is equality and stuff like that. But, you know, I never got a raise when I was there. I ended up running 3 lathes. The last couple of weeks I was there, I was running 3 different lathes. I would set multiple lathes up, cut, walk to another lathe, cut another part, might have to turn that part around, go to another lathe, cut the other half of that part. And these are cutbacks, by the way. And then the other employees, the staff, would take the other part off. I would then go reload that one, turn the other lathe part around, and start running one. Sometimes I got risky and ran 2, but it just wasn't wise to do that because, you know, you might get yourself off guard. But I put markers out, so at least if I heard the marker fall or something, I could run the machine. And it was crazy. I was doing multiple people's work, and on average, an individual would do 3, maybe 4 pieces a day. That's cut back on a lathe that spins really fast and could kick out a part really fast. As long as your confidence level was high that you were making a good part. And these guys, they were just destroyed by me. I was making 12 or 13 parts. And when all that downsizing at Weatherford started happening, I ended up being the last motherfucker at the lathe. I was making reline rings and had 6 lathes to myself. There was one other guy there. He was cool as shit, but, you know, he was too of a horn dog and would not show up on the weekends when we were called in and stuff like that. And yeah, he ended up getting ousted. And I used to, dude, being in a lathe area like that alone, behind all that other staff as a white dude, and having them look back at me at the extruder, the painting booth, all of them just looking at me, it's like, man. And all of them, like, hearing all this anti-Mexican rhetoric and shit, it was an experience. Let's just put it that way. It's like, I didn't know that some of those guys there were illegal. They were hiding from view from me. I was like, wow. In America, that's happening at a Fortune 500. I don't know if it's a Fortune 5, but Weatherford was a massive company, right? Their name was pretty much everywhere. Their Wicked, like stealth bomber, upside down, MW, whatever logo was synonymous in the industry. Man, that blew my mind. And when I lost that job, you know, well, I didn't really lose that one. That one I quit. I knew I was eventually going to lose it anyway. So there was a vibe of something's coming, a shutdown, something's in the air, because apparently they had established in like El Salvador, I believe, the same shop that did the same thing for buku's less. And we were actually getting photos in from them too, and their parts were improving even against my parts. So I knew it was coming. So I ended up getting a hold. Well, my buddy Tony was friends with Anthony, but got a hold of Anthony, and Anthony worked at TAM, and Tony worked at TAM, and so he always kept in contact with him because he's a car guy, and car guys just glue to each other, other car guys. So he gives me Anthony's number, and I get a job at Custom Rubber. So I kind of quit that morning, thought about going back, and kind of saying like, I didn't really mean it. I was being stupid or whatever, but I didn't do that. I ended up calling Anthony, and I had a job at Custom Rubber the next following week. Custom Rubber, you kind of get the theme going here when I say this. Again, I was put in an environment where I was the only white guy in the shop. And this time, it was bad. These guys were a lot cooler than the other places. But, feeling vulnerable really was higher there because the area it was located in was so hood, so ghetto. I had never seen physically a hood like that, or a ghetto region of the city like that. You know, I thought they were just in shows and stuff, but I'm the the Burger King there, eating at the Burger King. I would girls would throw condoms at me when I was in the Burger King. Tell me if that's not the strangest fucking thing you ever heard of. They were throwing condoms at me at the Burger King while I was eating. Like, I would turn my head or something would hit me and there'd be a random condom, and I would look around and there was this one overdressed girl walking around the fucking Burger King. Dude, the place was right next to a brothel, an actual prostitution ring. Wow, and they get their dates on these different dating websites, or I guess Craigslist or whatever at the time, and you know, that's where they were getting picked up at, was right there, and that blew my mind. That I had the Burger King lady there come up to me and ask me in a serious voice, and when she says I'm being serious, me and my buddy up there, we're having an argument if you're Mexican or white. I'm like, really? Is this like some kind of, like, am I some kind of exotic? Like I don't belong here or something? Is there like never any white people in this area? I couldn't believe that they asked me that at the Burger King there. That is high level ghetto, man. That was fucking that area. I did not know that. It's like a mountain, like in between. It's just weird roads, elevations, and bayous and stuff. In between, what was it called? Jason? No. It was what was that road called? I'm gonna cut this part out, but it was Jensen, and the Hardy Tow Road. And just like that, all the way down, and it follows Jensen until it merges with the Hardy Tow Road. There are just bums up and down the street. People lost and drugged out of their mind right next to my job. So getting fast food was narrowed, because I basically had the choice of Burger King or drive within the 30-minute barrier that I had for lunch to get back at my machine in time to exit the area. So I ate a lot of that Burger King, and yeah. There would be bums waiting outside the drive-thru to greet us as we're going to lunch from the place, asking for money. High-class ghetto area, all right? Within months of working there, and I should be talking about my resume. I'm mumbling about the bullshit that I've had these jobs. What a shitty resume. So anyways, when I worked at Custom Rubber, I basically did the same thing. I was at TAM, just with a little bit lesser quality machinery. And when I say a little bit, I mean a lot, because they were kind of crap. But they did function, and when they did their job, they did it good. It just wasn't a very common occurrence. We call it a turn down, or they had this obsession with the thermal blade. At TAM, we switched away from the thermal blade and went straight to the cutter, because I found ways to cheat the cutter by sharpening it with a diamond grit grinder, which I could never get through their heads. It was insane sharpness, and at a higher velocity when you were cutting the rubber, it never had a really chance to. It'll buckle just at the right amount of buckle when you're cutting fast. And it was only when the blade was really sharp. When you slow it down, you can't really cut, because it'll just bunch up on the blade. So I actually got more in tune with the thermal cutter when I was there, because I just had no choice. Plus the machine, they were locking in certain gears. They couldn't go into other gears. All those other gears were locked up and gone. There was just a couple gears in each one of the machines. So some of the machines only had 3 gears in them, and they were like that. They were retrofitted to only have 3 gears. So there was a lot of levers that would move around that didn't do shit. They were just empty. So that's something I had never experienced until I worked at Custom Rubber. But I worked around it. And I actually got really good at it because I tried to explain to them about oscillation. These longer parts, they want to sway because of the weight. Those parts, the thermal cutter becomes your friend because you have to cut slow. The only problem with the thermal cutter is that as it gets hotter and dulls out, you start getting plaque buildup. So I had perfected grinding the thermal cutters before actually thermal cutting and running it not at a really high temperature, but a moderately high temperature. Like not at red hot, but at far lower than red hot. And the combination meant that the blade lasted longer and wasn't burning up on the tips because of the heat distribution into the rubber. And I had found a secret formula basically to cut these long ass pieces with that high surface area of the thermal cutter when I was working there. And so I had a lot of experience thermal cutting. I did coax them in more and more into actually wanting to use the other blade because harder rubbers, you should be using a sharp knife-like blade, you know. And we used to make them, fabricate them by hand over at TAM. But when I was working there at Custom Rubber, it only was a couple of cases where I was up. And one of the cases was unfortunately on a machine that had a natural wobble to it. So it looked like I was fucking up when I wasn't, because when I sanded it down, it only took me a couple of minutes of actual sanding and the part came out superb. Just to get rid of the moderate pattern that was in the actual, I guess you say the cutting lines, the cutting marks on the part. Close the window here. So, anyways, I ended up leaving that company. I mean, there's a whole bunch more I can talk about, you know, painting and wrapping the parts on turnstiles and stuff like that. But I'm pretty sure I don't have enough photos, and videos that are over 20 minutes usually kind of get boring anyway. So, we had a individual get caught up in the machine, and when he got caught in that machine, I ran over from the Remco, the wrapping area when I was wrapping rubber, because apparently I was pretty much the only person that would follow the instructions pretty much to a T. I just always made confirmations to make sure that I was wrapping it correctly, because the schematics were always kind of screwy there. We had a lazy engineer that worked in the front office, and he never really corrected schematics or prints like he should. So he would leave in or leave out like how many times you're actually supposed to wrap or how much pressure. So I was always getting caught over by the Remco because I would deviate some of the rules because I was actually taking my own notes and recording what parts were coming out good and why. And everyone was pretty much deviated from the actual operating procedure that was put in place because you had to. There was no other choice. The way that they asked were always messed up, and when you followed it, you were always to blame for the mess up. So that was the interesting thing about Custom Rubber, is that my goal was to not give a shit but to do it right. So, and they were kind of getting onto that. Everywhere I went, I was able to complete or do my part. Besides like some certain ones, because I was not given the right tooling, or there was some piece of the puzzle that was not given to me. Again, I was very much a white guy, but there it was a lot more teamwork. Even though there was one guy I really didn't like too much because he kept on picking on me, wanted me to mess up and slow down. He was doing the same damn thing that was happening to me over at TAM. But anyways, I was always going to check my work, double check my work with the inspectors. So when I ran a part that had a high probability of failure, any math that had to be done was double checked with the inspector. The inspector here at that facility gave me the wrong size for a really thin part, and I cut it perfectly, spot on, beautiful, no hills, no bumps or nothing, in one tolerance between 5 thousandths up and down. The part was the wrong size. It was perfectly the wrong size all the way down the part. So it became clear that the inspector gave me the wrong measurement, and when the math was double checked in the offices, it became clear that we were about to ship out a really badass part That was too thick. No one really caught it until it was inspected literally days before it had to ship out. So their top of the line, quote unquote, what they believe was their best machinist there because of his output. Uh, a lot of his parts were passed because little problems were ignored on purpose. Basically, it was kind of like a little mafia in there, but it was cool with it because I like the guy. He's like whatever, but he ended up getting stuck to solve that problem. He needed to take approximately like 10 thousandths off the part, which I could have done. But he was the great sandpaper guy. So he knew how to sand down 20 or 30 thousandths off a part, full blast with sandpaper like the gods. I couldn't do it because I was too fucking scared shitless to do it. That's where he fucked up because that thin ass part, you had to stabilize it and he didn't stabilize it correctly. So when he was sanding it, it started punching up and down, knocking up and down, and it sucked him in. Sucked him in and he flopped around that part. So when I saw that, I didn't really want to be lathes again. So after that, it's just been service work, service jobs. So I've my first run in with doing kind of service work was with my buddy Anthony, and not the same Anthony, by the way. We call him AJ, but he worked at a hood cleaning company, and they took me down as being super smart. I'm not the same kind of smart that they think. I'm not like paperwork or anything like that. But I went in there and I was asking too many questions. I was too curious. You know, there was no real draw in or specification of what I was supposed to be doing. The training was mediocre at best. So it ended up being not for me. And this trend keeps going because after that I started working for Scott Drilling. Uh, Scott Drilling, in the heat in the moment, when you're actually doing a lot of work, I have to run a lot of activities on my legs. My legs are not the best, especially my right knee. So I was not able to keep up with the really skinny, malnourished guy and an illegal immigrant and I guess a nephew or cousin or whatever. So, uh, but I still loved it. I love those guys. Those guys are really cool. But I know, unfortunately, that I didn't fit in that either. There's a little bit of soreness because soreness in my subconscious about it because just those guys seem to be in their own element. They're not very good at communicators. They're almost like they're psychically knowing what the other one is wanting to do there, and I was just like boo boo boo. There's kind of a little loss here and there. People would tell me a task, but I wouldn't hear it because they were talking away from me and stuff. It's like, yeah, if you go work for that company, you got to have multiple ears and stuff like that, and try to tag and see what the next task was. And I started doing that towards the end. I tried grabbing a motor. I left the motor on the cart, and I wanted it to be double checked, and it was the right proper motor. But he goes and looks at the other motors, and I put the other motor back like I picked the wrong one. This is what I was like in the next service job, and I didn't fit in there in that environment either. So apparently, a machinist always a machinist. So I'm just hoping that the next job I get, I'm working next to coworkers that want to work as a team, and people that believe that safety is the first and foremost priority, and to do a rundown and documenting of like all the steps to a certain degree, not to keep non-communication where someone knows a trick or whatever that makes the job doable. So all those have been things that have not been very fluent in the recent years. So as I post this weird verbal resume out there, and the way I'm telling it like a story on YouTube is an experiment in its own right. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm probably a lot more different than you imagine how I describe myself on here. I like to use tools to make sure that I don't embarrass myself by doing something improper when it comes to the arena of properly writing the correct spelling of things. So, but I think a lot of us are the same way. It's just some of us are worse than others. I happen to be on the worst side of the spectrum there. But You get the idea. I'm a machinist, and I want to run a lathe in a non-slippery environment with cool people. You know, people that they bump hands, fist to fist, so they know that you are part of the team.